Hello, everyone. This is part 2 of the video series in which I discuss Cymbeline by William Shakespeare. My name is Joseph Suglia, Suglia. Now, Posthumus, the character, Posthumus, is death obsessed, and with good reason. He is so called because he survived his childbirth, whereas his mother did not. She was, quote, deceased as he was born. Act 1, Scene 1. He is also so called, perhaps, because he ardently wants to die, and yet his death is denied to him. His death is denied to him. He says to the jailer, toward the end of the play, Act 5, Scene 4, I am merrier to die than thou art to live. So Posthumus, then, is posthumous. As his name implies, he is a survivor, right? He survives both his birth and his death sentence, despite his will to die. He is spasming with guilt. Spasming with guilt, he begs for a judiciary suicide. Why is he spasming with guilt? Well, we know, because he suborned the execution of his wife, Inogen. So he's begging for a judiciary suicide, an assisted suicide. Oh, give me cord or knife or poison, some upright justicer. Act 5, Scene 5. Posthumus's wish for judiciary suicide, assisted suicide, recalls another play. Remember, this play is endlessly recalling, summoning forth, conjuring other plays. In this case, the text recalls the tragedy of Antony and Cleopatra. In particular, Marcus Antonius's wish to be decapitated. If you've read the play, you will know that Mark Antony implores his servant Eros, that's a very significant name, Eros, to chop off his own head. If you're interested, you could watch and listen to my video series on the tragedy of Antony and Cleopatra. I've created a 3-part video series on the tragedy of Antony and Cleopatra. And not to psychologize, for all we have is the text, but I think it's fair to say that there is a heavy yearning for death in this play. There is a heavy yearning for the sweetness of death that pervades the work, that hangs over this text. Every member of Posthumus's family is dead. His father is dead, Cecilius Leonatus. Posthumus's complete name is Posthumus Leonatus. Leonatus means lion-born, right? His mother is dead. His brothers, the Leonati, are dead. And their apparitions, their ghosts, hover over him as he sleeps in his prison cell, and he wishes to join them in the infinite nothingness. But one could also say that the apparition of his dead mother hovers over this entire play. This is a death-obsessed play, despite its frivolity. Now, the reconciliation between the father, Cymbeline, and the daughter, Inogen, is devoid of all pathos. There's no pathos here. It's quite different than from the tragedy of King Lear, even as it recapitulates, even as it recalls the tragedy of King Lear. This reconciliation between father and daughter is, again, devoid of all pathos and is more risible than anything else. It does recall, as well, the restoration of Pericles' thought-dead daughter, Thaisa, in the play of Shakespeare, Pericles, Prince of Tyre. Yet another allusion which makes Cymbeline seem even more self-plagiaristic and almost, God help us all, postmodern. Now, if you're interested, I've created one video on Shakespeare's Pericles, Prince of Tyre. If you're interested in watching and listening to that video, it is available. Now, when I say that Cymbeline is almost postmodern, it certainly is self-referential, it certainly is auto-reflexive, it certainly is self-plagiaristic, right? This is not intended as a commendation, since there is nothing sicklier, more anemic than postmodern art. Now, the recipients of Posthumous and Iachimo is far stranger. Indeed, it is incredible. As I suggested above, are we so credulous to believe that Inogen will take Posthumous back? We've already discussed this, but think about it in video 1 in this series. Are we so credulous as to believe that Inogen will take Posthumous back after he gambled away her virginity and suborned her assassination? Are we that credulous? Posthumous, I think, and I know this is only an opinion, but Posthumous, I would say, is ethically unrestorable and unpardonable. What he has done is unforgivable, and he has surpassed the possibility of redemption. And yet Inogen apparently forgives him. This leads me to believe that Shakespeare is indeed playing a prank on us. This play is a prank. That's my interpretation. And it leads me to believe that in a play in which the names of so many of its characters are redolent of sense, right? They're redolent of signification. I think that the name Inogen was intentionally chosen to represent innocence, right? Inogen is innocent, I-N-N-O. The first 4 letters of Inogen's name are, of course, contained in the word innocent. Unfortunately, Inogen is innocent in every connotation of the word. All connotations are intentional. In other words, she's innocent in the sense that she did nothing wrong. She didn't commit adultery against her husband Posthumous, but also she's innocent in the pejorative sense. She's innocent in the sense of being unknowing to her own detriment. She is perilously ignorant in any event. So Inogen apparently forgives him, only to be struck to the ground by Posthumous, who does not recognize her. Because remember, Inogen is swathed in the clothing of a peasant boy, Fidella. Interestingly, Posthumous is also dressed as a rustic, as a peasant boy. It's very strange. I mean, this is one of the reasons why, although I prefer to read Shakespeare rather than to see his plays staged, dramatized, cinematically represented, I think this play benefits from being seen, which is why I do recommend the 2014 filmic interpretation. But anyway, I divagate. She says, "Peace, my lord." She implores Posthumous, "Peace, my lord. Hear, hear," before she is struck by him. This is in Act 5, Scene 5. Now, this moment resurrects the final act of Pericles, Prince of Tyre, wherein Pericles forcibly drives back his daughter Marina, whom he at first does not recognize, right? Because Pericles lost his daughter when she was 1 day old. And so he doesn't really recognize his daughter. Later on, I mean, as the scene progresses, he notices a resemblance between his wife Thaisa and his daughter Marina. But I don't want to digress too much. But it is relevant. It is relevant because I'm trying to cross-reference. There's a kind of interpenetration, cross-pollination between this text and many, many of Shakespeare's earlier plays. Remember, this is a late romance composed circa 1610. In any event, to get back to the text, we are also supposed to believe that King Cymbeline will forgive Belarius for having kidnapped the princes, the king's sons. Remember, Belarius kidnaps the king's sons, the princes. Cymbeline, the king, has not even seen his own sons, his only sons, for 20 years, thus robbing the king of the opportunity, the experience of witnessing 20 years of their lives. Now, surely any parent will feel this loss. Yes, it's very good that his sons are still alive, but imagine being a parent and not seeing your own sons, your only sons, for 20 years, from the age of 1 to 21. He didn't experience his sons. Cymbeline, incredibly, implausibly, improbably, even calls the abductor Belarius brother. This is a direct quotation. Cymbeline calls Belarius brother in the 5th scene of the 5th act. I'm sorry, but that surpasses all credibility at that point. It surpasses believability. Yet there are other improbabilities. Harold Bloom, raises the reasonable question: how likely is it that Inogen will fail to recognize her husband's anatomy? For surely wives and husbands recognize their spouse's anatomies, right? Even if one were to be in the darkness. I mean, any wife could recognize her husband's anatomy. Any husband could recognize his wife's anatomy. Doesn't matter what the gender is. It could be any gender, it could be all genders. But this is what Bloom writes in his book, Shakespeare, Invention of the Human. It seems odd that Imogen, in my text, her name is Inogen with 2 N's. In his text, presumably, it's Imogen. She's usually known as Imogen, I know that. But let me quote it again. It seems odd that Imogen could mistake the anatomy of Cloten for her husband's, but then she is in a state of shock. Now, this is really strange to me. Bloom, I think, is being too charitable in the final clause of his sentence. Remember, the final clause of that sentence is, but then she is in a state of shock. He's being too charitable, too indulgent, too obliging, I think. No, I mean, there's no reason for Inogen, as I would call her, because that's what she's called in my text, in my version, in my edition. There's no reason for Inogen not to recognize the headless anatomy of Cloten as not being the headless anatomy of her own husband. And I would raise yet another improbability, another implausibility. Why does Inogen assume that the clothing of Cloten's acephalic cadaver, his headless corpse, right? His headless cadaver is that of Posthumus, right? So Cloten's body, his headless body, is lying supine on the ground, wearing, it's true, an outfit that Posthumus wore. Why does she make the assumption that that body, that corpse, the headless corpse lying on the ground, is that of Posthumus? Simply because Posthumus wore that outfit? Let's think about this for a minute. Inogen asks, "Where is thy head?" She is addressing the corpse as if it belonged to her husband. Where's that? I, me, where's that? This is Act 4, Scene 2. Now, here's a question, which I think is a reasonable one. Does Posthumus wear the same clothes every day? And does he? Does he wear the same clothes every day? I'd like to know. Is Posthumus the only one who would wear the same outfit that his ostensible corpse is wearing, right? Isn't there, I don't know, isn't there an Abercrombie and Fitch or something, or a Forever 21 around where, I mean, Target, I don't know what's relevant these days. But Cymbeline, I would say, is as improbable as the Comedy of Errors, another play, right? In which you have characters who are mistaken for one another and who wear the same outfits as their counterparts. This play recalls time and time again the Comedy of Errors. So not merely is the play fraught with improbability, with implausibility, right? There are also leaps of false logic. Paralogisms abound. Let's think about that. False logic, fallacious logic. Why, for example, does Cymbeline muse aloud that it would have been vicious to have mistrusted the evil step queen, right? His wife, even after he discovers that she never loved him and murdered his bio daughter. Now, these are direct quotations. I mean, I'm paraphrasing slightly, but the word vicious, mistrusted, she never loved him, come directly from Act 5, Scene 5. So he does say, and I'm lightly paraphrasing here, it would have been vicious to have mistrusted her. The she is again the wicked, evil, poisonous, sinister step queen, right? Why would it have been vicious? This is not even a rhetorical question. It's an instance of hypophora. Hypophora is a term in rhetoric, which means it's a rhetorical question that is nonetheless answered. Because I'm going to answer. Because the king gives us an answer. I'm just going to repeat his answer. Why? Because the evil step queen was beautiful. That's a direct quote. And her flattery, in quotations, seemed to be sincere. So because the evil step queen is beautiful, according to the king, and her flattery seems to be sincere, the king's ears and heart thought her like her seeming. That's a direct quotation. His ears, my ears, and my heart thought her like her seeming. Again, Act 5, Scene 5. In other words, she was pleasing to his senses. She was pleasing in a co-anesthetic manner, right? Co-anesthetic means pleasing all of the senses. Now, that might be a bit of a stretch, but notice he does say that the queen was pleasing to his eyes because he uses the word beautiful. He doesn't say to my eyes, but he does use the word beautiful, which I assume means optically beautiful, right? So there's the eyes. He does say explicitly that the queen was pleasing to his ears. Okay, so the eyes, the ears, and pleasing to his heart, which I know is not a sense organ. But notice, it's a co-anesthetic experience because the king had this agreeable co-anesthetic experience of his queen, of his wife. Well, therefore, she must be trustworthy. Again, co-anesthetic means a full body experience of someone or of something. I'm emboldened to say that because he does include his heart, right? Do I need to point out that this does not follow logically? This is a non sequitur. A non sequitur, not, I don't mean to insult anyone's intelligence, but if you don't know, a non sequitur means literally, it does not follow. It does not follow how? Rationally, or I should be more precise, it does not follow logically. We are mistreated by another paralogism at the very opening of this text, right as it begins in Act 1, Scene 1. The first gentleman, this is, I should say, this is a very Shakespearean conceit, or I would even call it a Shakespearean strategy. Before we see the main character, and we'll talk about that, we hear other people talking about him or her. Shakespeare does this all the time. Hölderlin does this too. If you've ever read The Death of Empedocles, I wrote my dissertation about that text partly. I wrote my dissertation about many different things. I wrote about The Death of Empedocles, if you're interested in reading it. It's been recently translated into English. Anyway, so the first gentleman overpraises Posthumus. Why? Because Inogen chose him over her stepbrother, Cloten, right? And not only that, the first gentleman is saying, Posthumus is wonderful, as we'll see. He overpraises Posthumus because Inogen chose Posthumus over any other man on the planet Earth. And apparently she's regarded as being wonderfully, wonderworthily, wondrously beautiful by everybody. Posthumus's virtue, this is what the first gentleman says in Act 1, Scene 1. Posthumus's virtue, by her election, may be truly read what kind of man he is. Now, what does that mean? Just to translate this into contemporary English, as if Posthumus's virtue, he is a virtuous man. Why? Because Inogen chose him. That's essentially what the first gentleman is saying. As if beautiful and virtuous women only choose handsome and virtuous men as their husbands. That doesn't follow logically, nor does it even follow empirically. Now, there are certain moments in this text which are so fantastically bizarre that they surpass the limits of dramaturgical respectability. My favorite example of this is, and this is incredible, is Inogen's ejaculatory optation. Optation it's a term in rhetoric. Optation means the expression of a wish. It's the verbalization of a wish. When someone says, "Oh, I wish I had a horse," a horse, my kingdom for a horse, or in a cinematic interpretation, a jeep, my kingdom for a jeep, right? Anyway, so Inogen frothingly fantasizes that she would like to see her stepbrother and her husband sword fighting each other in Africa. I mean, it's just incredible. She actually says this, and I'm going to lightly paraphrase. She would prick with a needle the goer back. So she's imagining, this is so bizarre, she's imagining her husband, Posthumus, and her stepbrother, Cloten, having a sword fight in Africa. Why Africa, I don't know. And she says that she would prick with a needle the goer back, i.e., whichever of the two backs away from the fight first. So if her husband, Posthumus, is reluctant at any stage to fight Cloten, her stepbrother, she would take a needle and prick him. If Cloten is reluctant, she would prick him. Now, I know I'm taking this very literally. This might be a curiously literalistic reading of the text, but this is an odd moment. I think we could all go that far. Everyone's fantasies are odd, I suppose, but you rarely read about or hear about such fantasies verbalized in Shakespeare. This is an odd Shakespeare play. Now, since we are reading a play that is never entirely its own, right? Because it is endlessly referring or alluding to other texts, we might reasonably question, what precisely are we reading? What is this text? Is this a play about the character named in its title? Why is this play entitled Cymbeline? Why? Now, I can understand why the tragedy of King Lear is so called, for it is indeed the tragedy of King Lear. I could understand why the tragedy of Macbeth is so called, because it is indeed the tragedy of Macbeth. But why is this work called Cymbeline? King Cymbeline hardly dominates the play. He is given relatively little stage time. Now, we see him screaming at his daughter and at his son-in-law in the very first scene of the play, but he does not remerge before the beginning of the third act, wherein he discusses Roman-British politics, right? He discusses Roman-British diplomacy and conflict with his wife, the poisonous queen, and her slimily reprobate son, Cloten, right? So Cymbeline then vanishes. He vanishes, he disappears, and only resurfaces in Act 3, Scene 5, only to withdraw once more. Indeed, we only see him again at the very, very close of this play, to be precise, in the second scene of the fifth act, in which he is speechless, he's silent. He doesn't say anything. He doesn't say anything at all until the very ending of this play. But yes, it's true, according to the stage directions, we see him, he doesn't talk, in the second scene of the fifth act. in which he is silently taken by the Romans and then rescued by his unrecognized sons and by his substitute, Belarius, whom he will forgive incomprehensibly. I mean, it's true. I mean, Belarius did save his life. But again, Belarius is the man who kidnapped his sons for 20 years. I suppose this is an ethical question that if I were teaching an ethics class, I would pose and pursue this question with others. I don't know. Someone saves your life, but he kidnaps your sons for 20 years. Your sons are absent and silent, incommunicado, incommunicative for 20 years. Do you forgive the kidnapper if the kidnapper saves your life? This is actually, I've never thought about this before, but I suppose this is an interesting ethical question, or a question for the philosophy of ethics, for deontology. Anyway, let's conclude here. We've talked about many things, right? We've talked about the auto-reflexivity of this play, right? The fact that it refers to itself constantly. We talked about the meta-theatricality of the play. In other words, the fact that this is a play that endlessly alludes to other works by Shakespeare, at least 20 other plays. We've talked about the improbability of the play, the fact that things happen that would never happen in reality. We've talked about the fallacious logic, right? There are moments in which the characters say things that are dubious at best and blatantly illogical at worst, right? The characters say things that are fallacious from a logical point of view. And we've talked about the overall absurdity of the play, right? So the auto-reflexivity, the meta-theatricality, the improbability, the fallacious logic, and the overall absurdity of the play fortify my conviction that it is a prank. It is a farce. It is a comedy, an unacknowledged comedy, a lampoon, a lunatic play, an antic play, a woozy play. Cymbeline unsettles the readers or the spectators' expectations that would be incubated and marinated by other Shakespeare plays. Taking all of these matters into consideration, Cymbeline comes across as nothing less and nothing more than an elaborate practical joke. Perhaps Shakespeare learned that to become a great author, one must have a seething contempt for the reader or for the spectator. Thank you very much. This is the conclusion of my lecture series, a series in 2 parts on Cymbeline by William Shakespeare. My name is Joseph Suglia, once more, Suglia. Thank you very much. If you're interested, I have other videos. I've only just started my YouTube career, which is not a career. I'm just doing this for my own, I don't know, my own enjoyment, my own edification, and perhaps for the edification and enjoyment of others. But if you're interested, I've created a 15-part video series on Beyond Good and Evil, Prelude to a Philosophy of the Future by Friedrich Nietzsche. 15 videos. It's long. It's about 24 hours long, but I think you'll get something out of it. I've also created a video series on the tragedy of Antony and Cleopatra, as I mentioned earlier, by Shakespeare. Then I went on to create a 3-part video series on the genealogy of morality, a polemic by Nietzsche. And then I went on to create, well, one video. It was only one video, 90 minutes long, on Pericles, Prince of Tyre by Shakespeare. And then I created a video on Die Götzendämmerung, Twilight of the Idols by Nietzsche, Nietzsche's late period polemic. And this is it. This is the 2-part video series on Cymbeline by William Shakespeare. Cymbeline, sorry. I grew accustomed to pronounce it Cymbeline because I'm very familiar with the Pink Floyd song. If you haven't heard that beautiful song, you should check it out. It's a relatively early song by Pink Floyd from the More soundtrack, More soundtrack by Pink Floyd. One of their most beautiful songs, I think. It's even better in one of the live versions. But anyway, whether or not that song has anything to do with Shakespeare's play, I don't know. But apparently, I've done research. Apparently, um, the name, the title of the play, the name of the character, and the title of the play should be pronounced Cymbeline. In any event, thank you very much. This is Joseph Suglia signing off and signing out. Thank you.